So since you brought about the calorie aspect of an insulin resistance, so what are the contributing factors to insulin resistance? At least the vocal people who are vocal about this think it's just excess carbs, but we as a population, at least Indians, have a lot of carbs, or Asians generally have a lot of carbs from the old day, but insulin resistance is more now. So that clearly doesn't make sense. So what is going on from your understanding?
Again, like the thinking on this had developed largely by listening to people in the keto carnivore sphere, because that's what I was inspired by the most for, a couple of years. So I often, would hear these people making arguments around, even promoting low carb diets and stuff, primarily in the context of diabetes prevention, or you're putting diabetes into remission and things like that. And I believe that for the longest time, it just made intuitive sense that diabetes is a problem of excess carbohydrate, and if you cut it down, you're going to reduce insulin resistance. And of course, there are randomized controlled trials to support it. We have RCTs with low carb diet showing that they do help with weight loss and they do help reversing insulin resistance. But it's a very out of context small part of the story. I'll tell you why. So when you're trying to think about insulin resistance, we have to understand the physiology a bit and how it even develops in the first place to understand what are the contributing factors that increase insulin resistance. Insulin resistance doesn't happen because you are increasing a certain macronutrient. As I said, even with that, if we were to argue about macronutrients, you can clearly make the case that saturated fat per calorie is worse for insulin resistance than PUFAs. That's very, very clear. And that will be part of my recommendations also, if we were to, if I was to tell people like these are 10 things you can do to reverse insulin resistance, swapping saturated fat for PUFA would be one of them. But it would be one of them compared to everything else. So when we look at how insulin resistance develops, it's a matter of accumulating fat in the wrong place. So there's something called the personal fat threshold, which has been demonstrated in randomized controlled trials. It used to be a theory earlier, which had to be validated and tested, but there's a professor, I think from England, whose name is Roy Taylor. So he conducted these studies. He's like expert in the field. He conducts trials with respect to diabetes research and things, trying different kinds of dietary patterns and stuff. So when you look at his trials, he was clearly able to show that you can put diabetes into remission. This is of course type 2 diabetes, depending on how long someone had diabetes for. So the longer someone had diabetes for, the harder it was to reverse. But when they stratified the groups in the population, you could get them to reverse insulin resistance just by getting them to lose weight. So what they found in the research is that everyone has a certain threshold to which they can accumulate fat in the right place. So there's all fat is not as bad as certain kinds of fat. I'm talking about the fat we accumulate around our bodies. The fat that we accumulate subcutaneously under our skin is much much minor. Like it barely has any role on the insulin, like the metabolic syndrome aspect of things, compared to accumulating fat around your pancreas and your liver. That is the most damaging kind of fat that you can have, which we commonly refer to as visceral fat and stuff, which is what DEXAs and things like that try to test for it. So getting the fat down in that place is what helps to reverse insulin resistance. It's not a matter of reducing the carbohydrates or reducing the fat, because we clearly have research comparing Mediterranean diets to low carb diets. I mean, I've seen some research even comparing both of them head to head, where the low carb looks a bit better for a couple of months. But if you look at the long term outcomes in those trials, the Mediterranean diet, like in the long run, past 6 months, had lesser insulin, had better glucose control. So to make this whole thing out to be that it's just carbohydrates that are causing it is a full short-sighted view of like the most of the science on the subject, because we clearly have a lot of intervention studies, and I think this is underpinned by the carbohydrate and insulin model of obesity, which also doesn't have too many legs to stand on, to be honest. Because if you look at weight loss trials which equate calories, equate protein, and then like switch around other macronutrients, you clearly see that I mean, you can get someone to lose weight while having a high amount of carbohydrates. It's just not really like that big of a deal. If you just look at the research, you see this consistently come up again and again. And I think that that's the main thing that's held on to in terms of even why people recommend low carb diets, as if it's some unique thing that is exclusive to low carb diets, which can't be replicated with that. So even, I mean, this is shown to be true for people who have a lot of weight, that getting them to drop like 15% or so of body weight is enough to put diabetes into remission. They even tested this hypothesis on lean people who had diabetes. Even with them getting them to lose around 6 to 7% of their weight, they were able to put diabetes into remission in large number of cases, like 70-80% of the group they were able to put into remission. And this is again not by doing low carb diets or anything, just by getting them to lose weight by restricting calories, they were able to do that. So in order to
So
fix insulin resistance, restricting calories is very important. I'm not saying that as a oversimplified thing, because there are many things which affect how much your satiety is, like how full you feel after a meal, and there are many things which affect how much you expend. Even within that conversation, there is evidence to show that hormone modulation is important in certain contexts. If someone has hypothyroid, if someone has low estrogen, like past menopause, it's important. If you just restore those hormones, you're going to make it easier for them to lose weight. Like the people, the metabolic rate and everything changes if you like get someone's thyroid status back to normal. So it's not to say that just what food you put in is the only metric. There are some disorders where there's a scope for hormone modulation. Clearly not for insulin though, and clearly not for leptin, because both of those things are a response to fat or certain kinds of like macros, rather than it being a cause of fat gain to begin with. So when we talk about restricting calories, there are many approaches. There's time restricted eating, there's OMAD, there's like low carb diets, low fat diets, Mediterranean diet. Whatever works best is what you can stick to and sustain in the long run, and different people have different preferences. So health is not just a metric of what you can do for a couple of months. It's what you can do consistently for years on end. That's what changes long-term health outcomes. So it's not really
right,
going to help if you can do a low carb diet for 3 months, but then after that you go back to just eating how you're eating. It's better to do a diet that might not be like as perfect as you think it is, but if you're making certain important changes and you can stick with it, it's going to be better than you not doing anything at all. So that's number
right.
one, getting people to reduce that. And then there's other things and interventions which also impact how much fat we store around our organs. Stress has been shown to be independently like a factor. So getting people to lower stress actually reduces fat accumulation around in the visceral area. There's research on sleep, like there's research on sleep apnea specifically, and with sleep in general, getting people to sleep better if they're sleep deprived, and getting them to have adequate sleep reduces fat accumulation. In terms of exercise, there's specific research on cardiovascular exercise that is better for reducing fat in the visceral area compared to other forms of exercise. So these are the main interventions that I would make in order to actually move someone towards better metabolic health. I already mentioned swapping saturated fats for PUFAs. That would also be one of them.
So if I were to understand this clearly, you can say visceral fat is the problem, and any diet or any lifestyle change which takes care of this problem, whether it is low carb, low fat, or anything else, or fasting or whatever it is, can effectively deal with metabolic illness.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a good
Right.
thing. Yeah.
And one more thing, the argument in favor of low carb is that you can see your blood sugar levels going down, which you might not see with a low fat diet or any other diet. Uh, people go all around with CGM. So what are your thoughts on this part?
Yeah, CGMs, I think I alluded to this last time, but they aren't even, I would say, even helpful for most people who don't have diabetes. Okay, so let's talk about post meal glucose spikes that way. So if your post meal glucose spikes are under 180, there is no research linking it to bad health outcomes. There is research linking post meal spikes above 180 to bad outcomes. That is substantiated with a test called the glycomark. It's called 1,5 anhydroglucitol. We get it with thyrocarotid. Other labs aren't running